Hello traders, welcome to the Nexoel Trading Hub YouTube channel. So we're going to be looking at the weekly forecast for the coming week. So this is the dollar index and this is the monthly time frame. So from the monthly time frame, we've identified our drawn liquidity, which is the monthly fair value gap. You can clearly see here after we saw price fully mitigated this monthly fair value gap and we saw price reaction to the downside. Looking at how price took out this buy side liquidity and gave us this indecision candle, and then in the month of February we started seeing this bearish momentum to the downside. So when we get to the weekly time frame, from the weekly time frame we identify the weekly breaker, and within this fair value gap here in the weekly time frame, within the daily time frame we identify the daily bearish order block, which we can clearly see price respected the confluence of the weekly breaker block and the daily bearish order block, and now we can see the fall of price to the downside back into this weekly fair value gap we identify from the weekly time frame. And what we can see is we had the mitigation of the weekly fair value gap. Price returned back into the daily bearish order block in confluence to the weekly bearish breaker block, and we had further bearish movement to the downside, violating this weekly bullish fair value gap, now acting as an inversion fair value gap. So we know, guys, last week I clearly told us to expect to see the possibility of a pullback of price to the upside into the weekly inversion fair value gap, and we can frame the bearish continuation to the downside. So within the daily time frame, we identified that we saw the bearish fair value gap within the weekly inversion fair value gap. That helped us to establish a strong confluence to anticipate the bearish movement to the downside. So basically from the weekly time frame, we can clearly see that our drawn liquidity is a sell side liquidity here, this swing low, because below the swing low we can see we have the monthly fair value gap zone. So for the dollar index, due to the most recent price delivery, we're expecting to see the possibility of more downward movement of price to the downside to take out this sell side liquidity, mitigating the drawn liquidity from the monthly time frame, the internal range drawn liquidity we identify from the monthly time frame. So guys, let's check the daily time frame. So from the daily time frame, what we can clearly see is the confluence of the bearish daily fair value gap I pointed out to us last week, because this was Thursday delivery we had for the Friday delivery. So I told us to expect a pullback of price to the upside. Upon mitigation of this confluences of the sponsorship zone, we should anticipate to frame the bearish movement of price to the downside, and we can see how price return into that, and we can see the massive fall of price to the downside here. So basically now our drawn liquidity is the weekly sell side liquidity, and below the weekly sell side liquidity we have the internal range liquidity we identify from the monthly time frame, which is a monthly fair value gap. And within the monthly fair value gap here in the daily time frame, we can see we have this down close candle before the bullish movement of price to the upside that took out this liquidities, this swing high points. So what we can now see here, we have this rejection block here. So we could see price dip more lower to the rejection block, and we could have bullish reaction before we can have further bearish continuation to the downside. So clearly now from the daily time frame, we can also see that price created another daily bearish fair value gap here. So this is going to be our zone of interest, our sponsorship zone of interest. So we want to see how price return to the upside into this fair value gap, and then we frame the bearish fall of price to the downside in the dollar index. Or we could see the possibility that price may push to the upside, and then we could see price close above the fair value gap. We could see a reaction. Price may violate the bearish order block back into this weekly inversion fair value gap, because we can see the unmitigated mean threshold, and then we could possibly see that price may frame bearish movement, or we could have bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my anticipation for the dollar index, and this is just what I would tell you guys to anticipate. But since we are seeing more bearish momentum, I would want us to pay attention to price reaction within this fair value gap, since we have this bearish order block, to see how price reacts at this zone, and then we frame the bearish continuation to the downside looking at our draw on liquidity and the monthly internal range liquidity. So this is my expectation and perspective for the dollar index. Clearly you can just see that. So I told us all we could see price return to the upside, violating that back into this zone, and then this zone would help determine if we're going bearish or we're going to see price further give us bullish momentum to the upside. But for now, let's pay attention to the bearish movement of price to the downside. So let's check out the EURUSD, guys. This is EURUSD and this is a weekly time frame. So we can see how price failed to take out the swing low point, and we saw the bullish reaction to the upside. So basically this is the monthly fair value gap, which is the draw on liquidity, the internal range draw on liquidity. And here we have this rejection block zone. So for the EURUSD, since we're expecting to see the possibility of further bearish movement in the dollar index, and we'll be looking forward to more bullish movement in the EURUSD. Now let's go to the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, what we can clearly see from the daily time frame, we can see here we had this swing low point. Price gave us the bullish movement, failed to give us the bearish movement to take out this low point, and then we started seeing bullish momentum to the upside. So last week I drew our attention to this fair value gap in confluence to this mitigation block, this daily bullish mitigation block, and we can see how price returned into that zone, retested that, and we have the bullish push of price to the upside. So we've been paying attention to this daily bearish order block, which you can redefine as a rejection block, because we saw this reaction and price fell. Now price returned into this rejection block zone and gave us this bearish movement. Price faced mitigation at the daily bullish mitigation block, and we can see this bullish momentum. So this is our minor draw on buy side liquidity. So I'm looking forward to more bullish movement in the EURUSD, since we're expecting to see more possibility of bearish movement in the dollar index, except price decide to do otherwise. Based on how I also pointed out in the dollar index, then we can consider a bearish movement now in the EURUSD if the dollar index turns out to be bullish based on the perspective I also pointed out in the forecast for the dollar index. So but for now, I'm paying more attention to bullish movement of price to the upside. So what we can see is price have mitigated this rejection block zone, and with a deep mitigation of the rejection block zone, and then we had this bearish movement. Price reacted at this daily bullish mitigation block and give us this bullish movement. So we can see the bullish impulse. So we have the possibility of price just giving us further bullish movement, taking out this minor buy side liquidity, and then we could see reaction here before we have further bullish continuation, since this is the monthly drawn liquidity. But clearly you can see here we have this rejection block that took out this buy side liquidity. So from the 4-hour time frame, what we can see from the 4-hour time frame is the retest of the daily bullish mitigation block, and then we had this bullish impulse to the upside. Here we have the inversion fair value gap. So I'll be looking forward to see structural perspective within the inversion fair value gap, and then that would help frame the bullish movement of price to the upside. So this is my expectation. This is what I'm looking out for in the EURUSD, guys. So let's check out the GBPUSD pair. This is GBPUSD from the monthly time frame, and what we can see, reaction of price at the rejection block zone, and price gave us this bullish momentum, taking out the sell side liquidity, and we can see bullish momentum to the upside. The drawn liquidity is the monthly fair value gap we can see here, and we have this breaker block here. So let's check the weekly time frame. So from the weekly time frame, what we can see is how we can see bullish momentum, though structure is bearish. So now what we have is the drawn liquidity is the monthly fair value gap, we can clearly see here. And now from the weekly time frame, we can see prices reacting at this unmitigated week. So from the weekly time frame, we really do not have a clear reference point or sponsorship zone to consider. What I can see is the possibility that we have a fair value gap here. Let's look into that. So we have this fair value gap here in the weekly time frame. So we're going to check that in the lower time frame to help us determine the zones within the fair value gap we identify here in the weekly time frame. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, clearly what we can see within the weekly fair value gap is this unmitigated week. This week was mitigated by this movement, but the 50% of that week have not yet been mitigated. And in the daily time frame, we have the daily time frame fair value gap. And now what we can see is price reacting at this bearish order block. We're having the possibility of bearish movement to the downside. And what we can now clearly see is that price gave us this bullish order block. So for the GBPUSD, since we're expecting bearishness in dollar index and looking at what we basically forecasted for the EURUSD and the expectation in that, so we could see price, if price dips lower in the GBPUSD, then we could see price dip lower into the weekly fair value gap, or it may dip lower into the daily fair value gap before we have the bearish continuation. That is if price is going to violate this bullish daily order block. So basically, let's go away with this so that you can clearly see what I'm saying. Or let me change the color to that so that you can clearly identify the zones I'm calling our attention to. So you can see this is the weekly fair value gap. This is the daily fair value gap. So if price is going to violate this bullish order block, trying to take out sell side liquidity from the daily perspective, then we could see a dip to the zone and we have the bullish continuation. Or price may decide to dip a little lower into this daily fair value gap. And price may not necessarily have to mitigate the mean threshold. And then we have the bullish continuation to the upside. So let's check the 4-hour time frame to have a better redefinition of our expectations. So what we can see from the 4-hour time frame is that we have this bullish order block. Price here return mitigated the bullish order block. The open price of the bullish order block, the bearish colored candle, and then we had this bullish movement to the upside. Price gave us this choppy price delivery. We had this manipulation to the sponsorship zone here, and then we had the bullish movement of price to the upside. So clearly what we can see is the expectation frame from the daily time frame, the possibility of if price gonna drop more lower, then we could see price react at this zone, which is in confluence to the weekly fair value gap, the weekly bullish fair value gap. And then we have the bullish continuation, or price may dip a little lower into the zone, because also within this daily bullish fair value gap, we can see we have this fair value gap below this bullish order block in the 4-hour time frame. So we could see that mitigation and then the bullish continuation to the upside. So this is just my expectation for the GBPUSD pair. So let's check the 1-hour time frame to see if we can frame any perspective. So here in the 1-hour time frame, if GBPUSD doesn't necessarily create an impulse to the downside, then clearly we should be looking at the order block here in the 1-hour time frame. We can look at the order block here in the 1-hour time frame. So basically this is what I'm pointing out our attention to. That we could look to this reaction and then we continue bullish to the upside. So clearly I would just be waiting to see how price delivers to the downside, because from the 4-hour time frame, what we can see from the 4-hour time frame is the possibility that we frame from the daily time frame of price possibly returning back to retest this bullish order block, because the mean threshold of this bullish order block is unmitigated yet. Or we could now see from the 1-hour time frame that we have price gave us the return, mitigated this zone, price gave us the push, giving us a market structure shift, a push of price to the downside before for the bullish movement that took out this high point. Price seeked liquidity already here, which clearly also is in the 4-hour time frame. So clearly this is the last down close candle before the bullish momentum that took out the high. So clearly we should be looking at this zone from the 1-hour time frame. Let's keep our attention to this bullish order block to see how price reacts at this bullish order block to consider our bullish continuation to the upside. So this is all I have to draw our attention to in the GBPUSD. And clearly guys, if you really want to follow up with the weekly forecast on a daily basis, then you can do well to join the free Telegram community. And should in case you want to learn how to trade for yourself, our mentorship program is ongoing. You can check the link in the comment section so that you can reach out to us and then we guide you on how to enroll for the mentorship program. Mind you, this mentorship program is a live session mentorship program, and basically for each batch we only admit 5 students. So the earlier you apply for the mentorship program, the better it will be for you to be enrolled and then attended to within time. So guys, let's check out the AUDUSD pair. This is AUDUSD, and what we can see, price took out the sell side liquidity and give us bullish return to the upside into the monthly fair value gap. This is a monthly time frame, so let's go to the weekly time frame. So here in the weekly time frame, what we can clearly see is I told us to anticipate bullish movement of price to the upside, and where we are framing to see the bullish movement return to is the weekly bearish order block we have here. And clearly you can see within the monthly fair value gap zone, we have this unmitigated week, which price return into here in the weekly time frame to mitigate. And what we can see, we have this down close volume. Volume failed to close above this previous weekly candle. So we have the raid of this buy side liquidity. Price created this fair value gap. So since the anticipation on the dollar index is to see bearish movement, so we could look to the bullish movements in the AUDUSD pair. Since we have the bullish fair value gap here, my expectation now is the return of price into the fair value gap, and we can frame our bullish continuation to the upside. Let's clearly check the daily time frame. In the daily time frame, what we can see is that price is reacting at this bearish order block. Price mitigated the mean threshold of this week. This candle here, we can see we do not really have volume, we just have the wick, and price mitigated the mean threshold of that candle wick in confluence to this bearish order block. And we can also see the weekly bullish fair value gap we identify. Let's get back to the weekly time frame. Let's allow this to reflect on the daily time frame also. So back to the daily time frame. Here in the daily time frame, so you can see clearly price reacting at this sponsorship candle. So I'm expecting to see the possibility of a dip of price to the downside into the weekly fair value gap. In confluence, we have this open close price here. We have this open close price. So basically to the downside, we have the sell side liquidity and the bullish weekly fair value gap. So we'll look to the lower time frame to see the structural perspective, the entry model, and then we frame the bullish continuation to the upside. So clearly now we can consider this up close candle that sponsored this bearish movement as our breaker block, because this took out this sell side liquidity before we had the bullish movement. So we have in confluence is the open close price. So we could see the dip of price here and the bullish continuation to the upside. Let's check the 4-hour time frame, guys. So in the 4-hour time frame, we can see price mitigated this fair value gap also to this open close price here, and now we are seeing the fall of price to the downside. So I'm anticipating to see how price dips into the weekly fair value gap. But what we can now see is that we have price gave us a structural movement, just like the GBPUSD. Price returned to this 4-hour bullish order block because we had the down close candle here before this bullish movement to the upside that helped violate this bearish order block here. So what we can now see is price swept sell side, give us bullish movement, broke structure. So clearly now what we have is this bullish order block. So we have to check the reaction of price at this bullish order block. If price violates this bullish order block, then we have the weekly bullish fair value gap to look forward to, which is also in confluence to the breaker blocks zone we identified from the daily time frame. So this is what I have to show you guys in the AUDUSD pair. So let's check out the NZDUSD pair. This is NZDUSD, and this is a weekly time frame. You know, we saw the reaction of price at the weekly rejection block, and price had given us bullish movement to the upside. So I see bullish momentum. Price now reacting at this weekly fair value gap from this candle low to this candle high. So we can see price mitigated the mean threshold here, sponsored this bearish movement that took out this sell side liquidity, and now we're seeing bullish impulse to the upside. Now we can see that volume closed above the consequent encroachment of this weekly fair value gap. And clearly now we can see we also have another fair value gap here, which is going to act as a drawn liquidity. And we have the bearish order block from the weekly time frame. So clearly now we're looking forward to see the possibility of more bullish momentum to the upside, since also here volume closed above this previous weekly candle. So we could see the pullback of price and then the bullish continuation to the upside. So let's check the daily time frame. So here from the daily time frame, what we can see is price reacting at this bearish order block. Basically, you know, we followed this structural perspective, this price delivery, and how we've been anticipating our movements. So what we can see is the weekly fair value gap. Price here from the daily time frame have traded above the weekly fair value gap, above the consequent encroachment of the weekly fair value gap. Here we have this mitigation block where price is reacting at. We have a little fair value gap that price left here. This is a bullish fair value gap here in the daily time frame. So we can see price reacting at the daily bearish order block. So I'm expecting to see how price dips lower to the downside, and then we have the bullish continuation to the upside. This is my expectation in the NZDUSD. So I'm looking forward to see how price fills up this bullish fair value gap and possibly mitigate the 50% of this candle wick, and then we have the bullish continuation. Though we can see that this candle wick is a rejection block zone, so price may dip lower before giving us the bullish continuation to the upside. You know, I called our attention to this mitigation block zone also because we had the fall here that took out this liquidity. Price went to the upside, fell to the downside, failing to continue bearish, and we had impulse to the upside. So I called our attention to see how price mitigates this, and we framed the bullish movement to the upside. You can look at the previous weekly Forex Focus video to check the authenticity of what I'm pointing our attention here to. So this is the expectation in NZDUSD. Let's check the 4-hour time frame, guys. I'm not dropping too far lower time frames to give us any anticipations or expectations. I'm just dropping to the 4-hour time frame. So clearly we can see we have this bullish order block here. So we could wait to see the reaction of price at the zone, and then we frame the bullish continuation to the upside. If the dollar index continues bearish to the downside, then we should expect this majors to give us bullish continuation to the upside. That is if the dollar index continues bearish to the downside, guys. So this is all I have to show us for NZDUSD. Let's check the gold pair. So from the weekly time frame in gold, we can really identify bullish order blocks. We can just see the bullish fair value gap here in the weekly time frame, and gold is strongly bullish. Gold has really been a good asset class that we've been utilizing throughout the forecast from last year, from I think November, October. So what we can see is the fair value gap here, meaning if we're going to see bearish movement, so our drawn liquidity is this fair value gap. So to the daily time frame, what we can see from the daily time frame, here's the weekly fair value gap. So if we're going to have bearish movement, then we should see our price dips to this zone, and then we could consider bullish movement from that zone. From the daily time frame, we have this fair value gap here. So we could see our price dips here and maybe give us a bullish perspective. Or now we can see price continues bullish from this zone, because what we can see is from the daily time frame, we had this impulse on Tuesday. Price gave us this fair value gap from this candle high to this candle low. We have here price swept buy side liquidity, you know, from the CTR perspective. Price then dipped to the fair value gap, the drawn liquidity from the daily time frame, after taking the buy side liquidity to take the sell side liquidity, mitigating this internal range liquidity. And what we can see is more impulse to the upside, though what we can see is the bearish colored candle. So sell side liquidity taken, buy side liquidity taken. So clearly what we can expect is this is the candle that took out buy side liquidity, this took out its sell side liquidity, and in extension this candle's sell side liquidity, mitigating the daily fair value gap. So we could look forward to frame more bullish movement of price to the upside, or we could see price dip more lower into the fair value gap. If price violates this fair value gap, then we are looking forward to price dipping into this fair value gap. This is me pointing out if price doesn't continue bullish to the upside. So from the 4-hour time frame, let's look into the 4-hour time frame. I shared a setup in the Telegram community where we anticipated this bullish movements. You can join the free Telegram community for that. So from the 4-hour time frame, clearly now we can see bullish momentum clearly. Within the daily fair value gap, we can see we have this down close candle before this bullish movement that took out this high and also took out this high point. Now we had the pullback to the downside, taking out the sell side, and price framed and gave us the bullish impulse to the upside. So after price gave this bullish momentum, it returned again back into the zone, taking out the sell side liquidity. And now we are seeing this rejection candle. Price took out sell side liquidity, volume closing above these candles. And now we can see the possibility of a bullish movement to the upside. So I'll call our attention to this 4-hour bearish order block. We can clearly see here, because when price firmed and gave us this bearish order block, we can see return mitigation, price fell, but volume failed to close below this. Now we're having the possibility of bullish movement to the upside. So I would want to see how price returns further to the upside. The reaction here would determine a lot. The reaction I'm going to see here would really determine a lot. So we could see a reaction of price possibly giving us consolidated movement before we have price breaking further to the upside. Or what we could see is price would come into the zone, respect the zone, and then we have fall to the downside. So this is what I'll be looking at. I would expect to see bullish, looking at the trend, because the trend is what? Bullish. Let's check the 1-hour time frame, guys. So here in the 1-hour time frame, so what we can see in the 1-hour time frame, price took out this, return to mitigate this unmitigated week, which is within the fair value gap zone. Price mitigated that week and gave us this bullish movement. So what we can see is we have the push of price to the upside, and now what we can see, price created this bullish order block. Price is reacting at the bullish order block. So my expectation first would be to see how we have bullish movements to the upside. So I want to see how price continues to the upside, and we're looking at this zone here, which is already 1 to 3.44 hour. So we're looking forward to this to see first, and then we can now determine the momentum in which price is ready to continue bullish, or price may give us bearish to the downside. So this is what I'm pointing our attention to for the gold pair, for you guys to follow through and utilize what we share on a daily basis. Then you can do well to join the free Telegram community. The link to that is in the description section, and if you're interested in our mentorship program, then you can do well to check the comment section, and the link to gain access for communication with us is in the comment section, guys. So cheers till I see you guys next week. God bless you all.